If I asked you what a Hollywood cookie cutter is shaped like, odds are you'd say The Hero's Journey. But what if I told you that one of the best films of the last decade was, in fact, more a hero's journey than even Star Wars: A New Hope? What if I told you that a story can follow a formula without being formulaic? What if I told you that Ryan Gosling was wrong?
Liar! Liar!
The hero's journey has long been blamed for the formulaic nature of recent books and films. And as a result, there are many people who will tell you that you cannot write a good original story when you use a narrative structure as a guide. Today, I'm here to prove those people wrong. To prove that originality in story has nothing to do with the flow and beats of the narrative and everything to do with the content. Because Blade Runner 2049 is one of the best examples of a hero's journey that I have ever seen. And obviously, it's a great film. Now, before I get into the meat of this video, I'm going to absolutely destroy my audience retention because that sounds delightful. So I'm gonna start this off with a big warning. This video is gonna get a lot more academic than my norm, and I'm gonna be using quite a few Joseph Campbell quotes, which can be a little hard to follow at times. So maybe this isn't a good background noise video. And because Blade Runner 2049 is such a long and nuanced film, you're gonna want to have watched it at least once in the last 2 years if you're gonna have any shot at following this video. And because, you know, that's not enough, if you've never heard of the true hero's journey, aka the 17 stages of monomyth, I'm going to recommend you start out by watching my video on that topic because I'm going to be going light on my definition of the stages themselves so that I can focus on the way the film uses those stages so well. Alright, so with that out of the way, I'd like to tell all 7 of you remaining about how Blade Runner 2049 perfectly embodies the hero's journey and proves that following a story structure does not make a story formulaic. First things first, let's talk the call to adventure. To follow the hero is to lose ourselves in order to find ourselves, to recognize our true selves.
Even when I'm talking for him, I can't figure out what he means.
Typical of the circumstances of the call are the dark forest, the great tree, the babbling spring, and the loathly, underestimated appearance of the carrier of the power of destiny. For the call to adventure to take place, we must start with a backdrop of the character's ordinary world. Blade Runner 2049 starts with Kay sleeping in his car on autopilot, a representation of how he lives his life as a replicant. He then goes to the farm and confronts Sapper. Saper? I'm gonna say that wrong for the whole video. Kay's call to adventure is then the seed of doubt planted by Sapper, and the question of what miracle he could have witnessed that would make him run.
I don't retire my own kind because we don't run. Because you've never seen a miracle.
This is the initial spark that sets Kay on his internal journey to enlightenment. Which brings us to Refusal of the Call. Walled in boredom, hard work, or culture, the subject loses the power of significant affirmative action and becomes a victim to be saved. His flowering world becomes a wasteland of dry stones, and his life feels meaningless. Kay's refusal is represented in his passing his baseline test. Sapper invited him to see himself as something more than a serial number, but he is walled into his perceived lack of humanity, and so it doesn't spark in him the dangerous thoughts his handlers fear.
Are you Sapper Morton? Civic number NK68514.
I'm a farmer.
If you could just look up and to the left, please.
He isn't thinking or living in terms of humanity. He's living in terms of a system. And this is the threat to our lives. We all face it.
Which brings us to supernatural aid, aka the mentor. Sometimes it's not a bad idea to refuse a call until you've had time to prepare for the zone unknown that lies ahead. In mythology and folklore, that preparation might be done with the help of a wise, protective figure of the mentor. Kay's supernatural aid is none other than joy. I know, just hear me out. So Kay's character need is agency.
Would you read to me?
You hate that book.
I don't want to read either.
To find meaning in life through the act of charting his own path and believing in his own worth. His want, which pairs so beautifully with his need, is to be loved, to feel worthy and special. He wants a sense of authenticity, and that's why his supernatural aid, his mentor, is Joy, who has never been and will never be real.
I see you're also a customer. Are you satisfied with our product?
She's very realistic. Thank you.
When we think of mentors, we tend to think of their most traditional forms, elders who pass down skills and knowledge. Because of this, many might not even consider Joy to even be a candidate, since she falls below Kay in terms of power balance. Some might even argue that she's a love interest and thus cannot fill the role of mentor, and those people have obviously never read YA fiction. So Joy matches the mentor role on a deep level even as she subverts it on the surface. Because it's she who offers Kay words of encouragement, tools, and pushes him to view himself as more in the most critical points of the film.
I always knew you were special. It's okay to dream a little.
Not if you're us.
Even her existence itself, tragically, serves as a non-human mind against which Kay can compare himself. Because at the end of the day, Joy is just a program, a glorified Alexa bordering on moral questions, but not quite crossing the line. Though it is worth noting that in many ways, Joy also fills a role as Kay's subconscious, because her personality itself is designed to cater to Kay's often repressed desires, and thus can make him face his internal monsters in ways that other mentors could only dream of. He craves authenticity, and so she tries to be a real girl. He craves a sense of worth, and she gives him hope. He wants to matter, and so she gives him a name.
Joe,
Joe.
you're too important for Kay.
All things he'd likely be too scared to face on his own, but she doesn't let him escape them.
You were right about everything.
Need further proof that she's a mentor? Look no further than her death right before the climax.
Oh no, what a tragedy. Not the mentor figure. Dead? Who could have foreseen this?
And so we come to crossing the first threshold. With the personifications of his destiny to guide and aid him, the hero goes forward in his adventure until he comes to the Threshold Guardian at the entrance to the zone of magnified power. The first threshold of Blade Runner 2049 is the moment where they discover that the bones of the woman who died in childbirth belonged to a replicant. The usual person is more than content, he is even proud, to remain within the indicated bonds, and popular belief gives him every reason to fear so much as to step into the unexplored. Kay believes that being born means one has a soul,
To be born is to have a soul, I guess.
and now he knows the child was born of a replicant. Together, these two things introduce questions that open up for him a whole magical world of adventure and possibility. There is no location change, because the world of adventure in this story is internal. It's a thought process, a state of mind.
The world is built on a wall. It separates kind. Tell either side there's no wall, you bought a war. Or a slaughter.
In old myths, internal battles were often represented in physical forms. Blade Runner 2049 uses no such simplifications.
Are you telling me no?
I wasn't aware that was an option, madam.
And so Lieutenant Joshi is the Threshold Guardian here, protective, warning of the danger that could come from the world learning of the woman-born child.
It is my job to keep order. That's what we do here, we keep order.
Threshold Guardians are preliminary embodiments of the dangerous aspect of the presence.
You've been getting on fine without one.
What's that, madam?
A soul.
The moment of true crossing is highlighted by the presence of the voiceover as Kay thinks back on Saper's words. Words that have new meaning now that he's stepped into the other side of the wall. And that brings us to Belly of the Whale. The idea that the passage of the magical threshold is a transit into a sphere of rebirth is symbolized in the worldwide womb image of the belly of the whale.
The whale represents the personification, you might say, of all that is in the unconscious.
Most of the imagery in this section screams Belly of the Whale, death and rebirth. Here we see Kay descend into the depths of Wallace Corp, the womb of the replicants, through dark and descending corridors lit with yellow.
Leaving the realm of light, which he controls and knows about, and moving toward the threshold. And it's at the threshold that the monster of the abyss comes to meet him.
They even pass submerged representations of different models of replicants, reminiscent of infants in the womb. For Kay, this stretches out and culminates in his finding the date on the tree.
What's that date? Is that a birthday? Is that a death day?
A date that represents at once birth and death. This is a moment where he first considers that he could be tied to this.
That's a standard motif of going into the whale's belly and coming out again. He has aligned himself with a programmatic life, And it's not the one the body's interested in at all.
And this is of course interspersed with scenes of love. The first of which shows rippling lighting on the wall, which gives the impression that we're underwater, submerged.
Water is the unconscious.
Wallace might be the figurehead, but it's Love who takes the role of true antagonist, and it's she who represents Kay's monster.
It was unclear what she was, at least to someone. We were difficult to spot then.
The script and film largely match, but one aspect that's lost is that the name Love is not actually a name Wallace gave her, but a common term he uses for women, one she took.
I'm here for Mr. Wallace. I'm Love.
He named you. Must be special.
Love represents the other side, the wrong path to validation and a sense of authenticity, and thus a warning of what Kay could become.
But your operation is strictly a drill site, isn't it? I wouldn't waste your money on intelligence, attachment, or appeal. Unless you'd like to add some pleasure models to your order.
The best angel of all. Aren't you, Love?
Going even deeper, the film shows us Love's monster, and we watch as a replicant is born and then killed in a highly visceral scene in which Wallace literally cuts into the womb of a replicant because she's unable to reproduce.
Happy birthday.
Is that a birthday? Is that a death day?
I don't know yet.
This brings us to Road of Trials. These trials normally occur in threes and involve the hero facing roadblocks, whether they be internal or external, metaphorical or real. Blade Runner 2049, this legitimately comes in a set of 3. Each of Kay's trials invites him to view himself as a woman-born child, and thus, based on his already existing stance, to view himself as possessing a soul. In the first trial, he talks with Lieutenant Joshi and faces the memory of the wooden horse.
Would it help you, Sheriff, if I told you it was an order?
I had memories, but they're not real. They're just implants. I feel a little strange sharing a childhood story, considering I was never a child.
With you, I sometimes forget. We're all just looking out for something real. What happens if I finish that?
Shouldn't I get back to work, madam?
The second is at the DNA center, where it's Joy who makes him face the reality of the date on the bottom of the toy.
A dangerous coincidence.
I always knew you were special. Maybe this is how.
And then, in pointing out that she's made of code, Joy also helps Kay by putting him in the human category, on the other side of that wall.
Mirror data makes a man, the alphabet of you. All from 4 symbols. I'm only 2.
And lastly, we have the orphanage, where the presence of the horse lends reality to Kay's memory, leaving only one barrier in his doubt of whether he could be the child.
How do I know if a memory is an implant or not?
This is the problem of killing the infantile ego, which is one of dependency, and coming into the mature ego of authority.
The bow on top of this section is the brief scene with Joy, where Kay's efforts in the trials are rewarded in a symbolic way. Here we see her sad. She's losing him and she knows it. Everything she is exists to please him, and because of that, she will never be the authenticity he craves.
Born, not made. A real boy now.
But despite her sadness, she continues in her set role, encouraging him by giving him the last weapon that he needs to face the ultimate test.
A real boy needs a real name. Joe, you're too important for Kay.
Which brings us to meeting with the goddess, for she is the incarnation of promise of perfection. The soul's assurance that, at the conclusion of its exile in the world of organized inadequacies, the bliss that was once known will be known again. Time sealed her away, yet she is dwelling still, like one who sleeps in timelessness at the bottom of the timeless sea. The goddess represents life-giving force, all-encompassing love, the bestower of knowledge.
Wallace needs my talent to maintain a stable product. I think it's only kind. I can't help your future, but I can give you good memories to think back on and smile.
The meeting with the goddess is the final test of the talent of the hero to win the boon of love, which is life itself enjoyed as the encasement of eternity.
What makes your memories so authentic?
Well, there's a bit of every artist in their work.
And it presents to Kay the final test of his ability to accept that he is more.
Someone lift this, yes.
And in a beautifully poetic way, we're shown that Kay has passed this final test by way of him failing his baseline.
Dreadfully distinct.
Dreadfully distinct.
Dark.
Dark.
Within cells interlinked.
Within cells interlinked.
Within one stem.
Within one stem.
And dreadfully distinct.
And dreadfully distinct.
Against the dark.
Against the dark.
A tall white fountain played.
A tall white fountain played.
You're not even close to baseline.
And if that wasn't enough indication, we also get this wonderful scene with Joshi where he lies to her.
I found the kid. Even he didn't know who he was.
And?
And it's done.
What does that mean it's done?
What you asked.
Finally truly embracing the call to adventure by going against the rules and commands.
Scans said you didn't look like you on the inside, miles off your baseline. Do you know what that means?
The Threshold Guardian no longer has power over him. Believing that he is more has made him more.
These two colors become motifs for how the feeling something inspires is the only measure of its authenticity.
It feels authentic, and if you have authentic memories, you'll have real human responses. Wouldn't you agree?
Though it seems small, it's this hope, this question, this possibility that is a clean slate on which he can rebuild his identity.
You were right about everything.
And once built, it will not be so easily torn down as it was negated. And that brings us to temptation. Because of course, freshly broken out of his mundane existence, the next beat that Kay faces is the temptation to return to it. Campbell labeled this stage as the realization and agony of Oedipus, and it's the moment of desire turning to negativity. For Kay, this comes in the form of the threesome, culminating in that slow pan into the full billboard of joy. A reminder that she isn't real, that she exists to show him what he wants to see and tell him what he wants to hear.
I'm so happy when I'm with you.
You don't have to say that.
I do hope you're satisfied with our product.
And in a way, she herself is a representation of his complacency. Like many forms of control, they've kept him compliant by giving him just enough to survive, just enough to strive towards to keep him from dying in stagnation.
How was your day?
I'm getting cabin fever.
Constant K. You can pick up your bonus.
Do you want to dance, or do you want to open your present?
What present?
Let's just say it's our anniversary.
Is it?
No, but let's just say that it is.
I'm getting cabin fever.
An emanator.
Joy's purpose is to function as a literally fleeting and hollow distraction from a lonely, cruel, and meaningless life, enacting eternally postponed promise of intimacy, fulfillment, and happiness. And the temptation here isn't at its core sex, as one might think, but rather the temptation to accept as real and human that which can never be those things. The temptation to fall back into the mundane illusion of authenticity. It's a teasing promise of a deeper level of imitation that would have once been more than enough to sate him. He may have escaped the cage that is Wallace Corp, but he's still walking around with a Wallace-branded shackle on his wrist, constantly trying to lure him back, even as she gives him the tools to succeed.
I see you're also the customer. Are you satisfied with our product?
She's very realistic. Thank you.
It's okay. She's real. I want to be real for you.
Because Joy exists to aid him, but her code, by design, does not let her save him from her existence.
Joe, please. I want this, but I can't do it myself.
I like to think that she knew this and it contributed to her asking to be deleted from the console.
You have to delete me from the console.
If anything happens to this, that's it. You're gone.
Yes. Like a real girl.
But even that can be explained as a coding decision to increase the likelihood of repurchase, so it's hard to say.
If it's inside you, not so much there as you think.
And that brings us to Atonement with the Father. The problem of the hero going to meet the Father is to open his soul beyond terror, to such a degree that he will be ripe to understand how the sickening and insane tragedies of this vast and ruthless cosmos are completely validated in the majesty of being.
Yeah, that's what I'd say too.
This is the stage where the hero must confront whoever holds the most power in their lives. For Kay, this is represented in two ways. First, with the encounter with Deckard, who is the father figure to the child Kay believes himself to be.
That father quest is a major hero adventure for young people. That is the adventure of finding what your career is, what your nature is, what your source is.
But then also with the encounter with Love, who embodies the monster within Kay. Here, Deckard accepts Kay as a show of atonement, and Love kills Joy.
I do hope you're satisfied with her product.
Her leaving him alive signifies atonement, and in a sense, she's even freed him from his final shackle and left him with nothing but agency as he must choose between the two paths before him. Give up or fight. She has gifted him this decision and took away the only being who could lead him in a particular choice. She gifted him the very agency that is out of her own reach. Which brings us to Apotheosis. This is the moment where someone dies, either a physical or a spiritual death, and moves beyond. For Kay, this is the encounter with Freya and the death of the idea that he is the mother-born child.
She was a boy that you hid.
That is just a piece of the puzzle.
As dreams that were momentous by night may seem simply silly in the light of day, so the poet and the prophet can discover themselves playing the idiot before a jury of sober eyes.
You imagined it was you. We all wish it was us. That's why we believe.
You come out of the forest with gold and it turns to ashes. That's another motif that occurs.
Now, many see this stage as the exact moment where the film throws out the hero's journey. Kay had no miraculous conception, he was never meant to lead the replicants to freedom, and therefore, this story cannot possibly be a hero's journey. But that stance is built on the belief that the hero must be a chosen one to complete a hero's journey, that they must be central element of what we perceive to be the greater story. But these are not requirements. In fact, myths of old, characters were often given divine conceptions, miraculous origin stories, and magical powers as a way to differentiate history from tales. In times where stories were conveyed largely through word of mouth, it was important to indicate whether it was history and thus imitatable, and what existed to be analyzed and contemplated.
What you have there is the result of a concretization of the symbols. To think that the symbolic statement refers to a historical fact. For instance, most of the Buddhas had no historical existence at all. Nobody thinks they ever had.
But that distinction isn't necessary in modern times. Nowadays, we still confuse fiction with real-life events, but that problem has moved to social media. And so there's no reason for us to have chosen ones outside of wish fulfillment.
So the hero evolves over time, like most other concepts and ideas. And
well, he evolves as the culture evolves.
Yeah. Unlike the classical heroes, we're not going on our journey to save the world, but to save ourselves.
And in doing that, you save the world. People have the notion of saving the world by shifting it around and changing the rules and so forth. And no, any world is a living world if it's alive. And the way to bring it to life is to find in your own case where your life is and be alive yourself, it seems to me.
And so this stage may strip Kay of divine status, but that metaphor is still there. The foundation on which he'd built his budding identity is taken, but it leaves behind the unburdened divinity of enlightenment. He is still capable of being a hero.
You know, you don't have to get into a giant laser sword fight and blow up 3 spaceships to become a hero. I mean, it's a very small thing that happens every day of your life.
And that brings us to the ultimate Boon. Athene answered his prayer in person. She assumed the appearance of Mentor, and seemed so like him as to deceive both eye and ear. Kay has now undergone all of the trials. He's been freed from his shackles, he has all of the pieces. All that remains is to put them together and find the answers he needs. Does he have a soul? Is he worthy? Is he human? And so, of course, it's in this critical moment that he encounters the billboard of Joy, who crouches down and talks to him in her purr of a voice.
You look lonely. I always knew you were special. I can fix that. Wanted. Love.
She feeds him lines he once thought were made just for him.
What a day.
It was a day.
And with this last curtain pulled away, that voice that told him he was special, worthy of a name, becomes the voice telling them that he's nothing.
You look like a good Joe. A real boy needs a real name. Joe, you're too important for Kay.
Stop.
And yet, the the threshold once crossed cannot be uncrossed. The values and distinctions that in normal life seem important disappear with the terrifying assimilation of the self into what was formerly only otherness. K may not be destined to directly lead the replicants to freedom, but he can still help others reach enlightenment, if only he lays down his life for something he believes in and goes after Deckard. And now we hit a fork in the road where many will point and say, see, it isn't a hero's journey, where's the refusal of the return? Where's the rescue from without? And those very questions are what gave my hero's journey video its name. Because the next 3 stages are vastly misunderstood in the conversion from Hero with 1,000 Faces to bullet points and charts. And I don't blame people. Campbell's book is frankly hard to read. But Campbell never meant these to be 3 stages viewed as sequential steps, but rather as alternate possibilities for an ending. The ending that plays out in Blade Runner 2049 is the magic of flight. Just kidding, ignore the whole fly and chase sequence that looks suspiciously like Magic of Flight, because the stage that actually plays out in Blade Runner 2049 is the Refusal of the Return. You see, Magic of Flight is the stage that happens when the boon has been taken against the will of the gods guarding it. But Kay is not running from god powers, but rather finding the courage to chase them. When addressing the refusal, Joseph Campbell gives us all of 3 pages, which consist almost entirely of examples, which makes this really hard to argue. But of those examples, he mentions the Buddha, and I think that best illustrates Kay's tie to this stage. The responsibility has been frequently refused. Even Buddha, after his triumph, doubted whether the message of realization could be communicated. When Buddha found enlightenment, he thought the task of trying to share it with the world would be too difficult, and so he thought to remain in nirvana. At this crucial moment of uncertainty, the god Brahma intervened. Like Mara, he too was a projection of Buddha's subconscious mind, the only difference being that he was a positive projection. And so the unmasked version of Joy shows up to Kay, reminding him that despite all the truths he's had to face, his sense of humanity remains. And if he lies down and dies, the other replicants will be robbed of the chance at that same enlightenment. And so he chooses not to refuse the return and goes forth to play his part in the hero cycle. The film doesn't hand this to us, and the brunt of this scene is put on the acting, but I believe this is a fleeting refusal of the return and is one of the few examples you'll find in modern media. Which brings us to crossing the return threshold, which is where the flight scene actually falls. The 2 worlds, the divine and the human, can be pictured only as distinct from each other, different as life and death, as night and day. Nevertheless, and here is the great key to the understanding of myth and symbol, the 2 kingdoms are actually one.
And what all the myths have to deal with is transformation of consciousness. That you're thinking in this way, and you have now to think in that way. It's trials and revelations are what it's all about.
They crash and fight, and all of it happens in water, lending a poetic element given water represents the subconscious.
Water is the unconscious. The creature in the water would be the dynamism of the unconscious, which is dangerous and powerful and has to be controlled by consciousness.
And in the end, love drowns in the water, submerged in the subconscious desires she was unable to escape.
The ancient models give the entire endeavor a bad name. What a gift, don't you think? From Mr. Wallace to the world.
And she had pulled herself into the transcendent realm and got caught in the negative powers of the abyss.
She chose the wrong path, and in the end, it led her to a meaningless death.
This was a test. We were difficult to spot then.
The best angel of all, aren't you, love?
The final threshold is this moment where Deckard is drowning, and Kay has the choice to let him die, which would ensure Anna stays safe, or save him and bring him to her. He chooses hope. He chooses to defy his directive one last time, to let the wall between worlds fall, even as he has nothing to gain from it. He shattered for himself the bounds of the last threshold. He made a vow that before entering the void, he would bring all creatures, without exception, to enlightenment. Which brings us to the freedom to live. This last stage symbolizes his letting go of the dream that he is the child. He's assimilated into what was formerly only otherness, and he now sees that the 2 worlds, the human and the replicant, are actually one. Man, in the world of action, loses his centering in the principle of eternity if he is anxious for the outcome of his deeds. But resting them and their fruits on the knees of the living God, he is released by them, as by sacrifice, from the bondages of the sea of death.
You die to your flesh and are born to your spirit. You have to have death in order to have life.
This section is called Freedom to Live, but in the case of Blade Runner 2049, the freedom comes in death. Death for a cause that one believes in.
He is sacrificing himself for something. That's the morality of it. Now, you, from another position, might say that something was something that should not have been realized, you know. But it doesn't destroy the heroism of what was done.
Dying for the right cause is the most human thing we can do.
You drowned out there. You're free to meet your daughter now.
Needless to say, the hero would be no hero if death held for him any terror.
You okay?
I know there was some debate as to whether or not Kay dies at the end, but I read the script and it somewhat hints at his death. And as Kay dies, he watches the snow fall, a reference to the white fountain in pale fire that was thought to be evidence of a shared afterlife, and thus a soul.
He no longer identifies himself with the history of his carnal body, but with the consciousness that informs that body. Mythologically, the shackles fall without leaving your wrists.
And so Kay's hero journey comes to an end that's as internal as its beginning was. In an era where so much media is handed to us in the simplest terms, it can be easy to see the lack of a visual, world-bound hero's journey as an absence of the myth altogether, when in reality it's a raging river hidden beneath a sheet of ice. Symbols are only the vehicles of communication. They must not be mistaken for the final term, the tenor of their reference. The hero's journey may look simple and formulaic when it's boiled down into bullet points and paired with clip art. But it's important to remember that those beats represent thousands of years of trial and error in our exploration of myth and storytelling. These are beats that spread and even arose independently in cultures across the globe, because they speak to something so deep in the human experience that it transcends time and space. And so as long as artists avoid literal interpretations, chase modern settings and problems, and aren't afraid to stray from the common path when stories veer off course, they can absolutely produce a hero's journey story that moves people. No one calls a table boring and overdone because it has 4 legs attached to a flat surface. They call it boring and overdone if it offers no new interpretation, material, or decoration to enhance that tried and true shape. That's not to say that changing that shape can't lead to an awesome table, but it isn't required to produce an art piece. And so I believe that the shape of a story can be familiar on an archaic level, while still sparking in its audience fresh ideas and inspiration. If you enjoyed this video and are interested in the ways Blade Runner 2049 embodies the heart and soul of modern mythology, check out my video on modern myth, which will drop soon after this one. If it's out now, you'll be able to find it in the end cards. And if you'd like to see a video on the philosophy of Blade Runner, Tim over at Hello Future Me did a great video on it with some different takes than mine that you should absolutely go watch. Alethea is now available on Audible, so you can go buy it. Trailer in the end cards with some voice samples of my awesome narrator. And thank you so much for watching. As always, I will see you in the next video.
Say you believe in your belief.